My guest has spent more than a year trying to solve the question of what went so wrong at Douglas Anderson School of the Arts. Megan Malakote is Jacksonville Today's education reporter, and she joins me now to talk about what she learned. Welcome, Megan.
Good morning, Ann.
I'm glad to see you here, and I'm glad to see that this article that has been in the works for so long has started running today.
This is very exciting.
Yes, it is. You actually began working on this as far back as June of 2024, and you sort of wanted to find out the why behind what we were seeing at that point. It was kind of this flood of concerns, teacher removals, and complaints.
That's exactly right. Because after Jeffrey Clayton's arrest in 2023, it seemed to set off some sort of reckoning that there was a lot of teachers removed also for sexual misconduct allegations. And so at a certain point, I think the community just starts to wonder, what's going on. So that was the crux of our investigation.
Yeah. And so you, in the course of this investigation, reviewed tens of thousands of documents. You requested enormous amounts of public records. You did dozens of interviews with current and former Douglas Anderson staff and teachers and students,
That's right.
importantly. And I guess, this is a four-part series. Tell us a little bit about how you tackled how what each segment was going to focus on, and a little bit about what today's segment does focus on.
Okay. Well, today's segment focuses on the initial kind of flashpoint that put this in the conversation. So it's the Jeffrey Clayton story for the most part. We tried to leave no stone unturned, so it's got all the details that we could possibly find in it, as far as what led up to his arrest, but the complaints that the school and district had received about Jeffrey Clayton for 20 years prior. And it moves on from there and then talks about the reporting process and what happened after the arrest. Um, Tomorrow's segment touches on the other teachers that were removed for allegations of sexual misconduct. Some of them have been reported prior, but there's some more details in it, and some of them haven't been reported in the past. Then with Wednesday's segment, we tried to address the question of why Douglas Anderson. Is it unique? How does it compare to other schools in the district and in the state? And then on Thursday, we will address the questions of how do we know it's not going to happen again.
Mm. So, in this initial deep dive into Jeffrey Clayton, I think one thing that emerges as a theme throughout the series, which I've been fortunate enough to read all of, and which is a remarkable piece of work, is this pattern of informal discipline. And so you take the Jeffrey Clayton instance. We should say, he's now serving a prison term for inappropriate sexual contact with a student, but he had been the subject of years of complaints of inappropriate conduct and inappropriate contact with students.
Mhm.
They had originated from other teachers, from parents, from people who'd just been visiting the school, from students themselves, and it was a very clear pattern of conduct. What did you find about the way that how the school administrators handled those complaints against him?
Well, what was interesting to me when I started to, go through all of these documents was that a picture emerged that seemed to imply that there was some sort of system of unofficial discipline. Now, we did talk with Principal Jackie Cornelius. Well, she didn't agree to an interview, but she did respond by email and she maintains that she did not keep an unofficial file of discipline about Clayton.
She was, we should say, the principal kind of for about a 20-year period, many of those years while Clayton was
Correct.
getting these complaints.
Correct. For the bulk of his years, it was 97 to 2017, I believe. And so, but when we look at this, we see that he had a relatively small number of official discipline within the district's, regular discipline system compared to how many complaints that we've heard stories of students telling or that we see email records of the district receiving. And so and I even talked with one person who was a former investigator at the district, and that person said that they knew they had a problem with Clayton, but one of the problems that they had in progressing him through this standard, system of progressive discipline was that a lot of the discipline was not recorded in an official way that allowed them to use the system that their policies are based around.
And so a lot of public agencies have what you note is called progressive discipline. And basically that means that there's this system. So you have perhaps a verbal warning and then a written warning, and then, the opportunities for discipline once that record is established. And what you found in the case of Jeffrey Clayton was this pattern of either post-it notes or handwritten notes that were outside of those formal channels, the outside of the documentation that would be required to make it part of Clayton's official discipline record. And those numbers, as you found them written in other places, often just handwritten notes, were wildly different.
Wildly different. So there was I ran across actually in a different faculty member's file, his personnel file, that somebody else who had been accused of misconduct. I was reading through his file, and in there's a handwritten note that talks about Jeffrey Clayton having 17 incidents and 16 verbals, and then it had Jeffrey Clayton's name written next to it. So I don't know what that refers to. You can just take it at face value, and I, it reinforces the stories that I've heard about other forms of unofficial discipline or unofficial ways of recording these incidents.
And so I do want to get into a little bit more of kind of the breakdown of what you did find on Clayton, because some of it is so striking. I mean, you interviewed 5 students who told you that either they personally or an adult that they trusted had reported Jeffrey Clayton for sexual misconduct and inappropriate conduct. You found in his record, these notes in his annual evaluation suggesting he needed to maintain greater professional distance, that he was told specifically not to tell, girls that they were pretty. That came in after a complaint where a parent volunteer said he was telling girls they looked hot.
Mhm.
Um, Need to improve his professional behaviors, citing similar complaints. But this is all happening over a pattern of years, and something really significant happened in 2020.
That's right. In 2020, if you'll think back to just what was going on in American culture at the time, right? It's the summer of 2020, and everybody is at home on the internet because of COVID. So the discussion happens then with after George Floyd's death, the Black Lives Matter movement kind of shoots up, and the also the hashtag Me Too movement is also in full swing at that point. And so the community here in Jacksonville also starts having a conversation about Douglas Anderson. And at first, it was stories of students' perceived racism, and then stories of sexual misconduct by teachers also started to come in through these social media channels and the conversations that were happening at that time. And so in through my research, see that as a like a flashpoint for when the conversation started to change from all these complaints were being um, routinely registered, but nothing, there's no evidence of anything happening, to all of a sudden then after the summer of 2020, then you start to see some movement in the direction that ultimately led in 2023 to Clayton's arrest, and then subsequent conversations that we've had about additional teachers as well.
And there was, in particular, one former student who made it a point to meet with the school's principal in 2020, Jade
Mhm.
Collins, and basically wanted to just let her know, like, this conversation is happening on social media. It's everywhere.
Right.
Students are talking about, they're naming teachers by name. They're talking about their experiences, um, and basically, you need to be aware of it.
Right, right. And of course, it was a Zoom conversation because it was 2020, the summer of. But she did. She met with her, and looking at that, then from now, you can see movement happening in the direction. In fact, I spoke with another source, Shyla Jenkins, who said that she really also believes that that was kind of the moment that it changed, and Jade's commitment to telling these stories and getting the word out there was kind of the first sign that something needed to happen. That Douglas Anderson has such a wonderful reputation and well deserved, let me say, um, as far as the students' achievements go. The students do amazing creative work, and it's just incredible to watch the things that they're able to do at such a young age. Um, but that reputation also came with this other hidden side, and so Shila's point and the work that Jade did kind of speaks to the idea that in the summer of 2020, the community realized that that comes at a cost.
Couple other things happened that same year in 2020, including what has kind of colloquially, at least in your reporting, known as the
The
list.
list, yes,
So a list was sent to the same principal, Melanie Hammer, and it basically laid out the names of people that were Well, explain to us what the note said with the list.
Okay. This was an email that was received first by a former student to Melanie Hammer in the summer of 2020 again. Um, and he was basically pleading with her to take these concerns seriously. That his letter said it's not just Jeffrey Clayton. It's not just fill in the blank, whoever is popular at the time. But here's a list of, I don't know how you want to phrase it. You know what the list is as well, but they all harm children, though
Right.
that's not the word that they used.
Right.
And then 12 different names followed. And so we will be talking about the list in tomorrow's story also. And it lays out a pretty clear picture, too, of the opportunities that the district had to act. So um, Principal Hammer forwarded this email to her direct supervisor at the time, who's Scott Schneider, and asked
And
what
he
she
was
needed to
a
do.
regional
He was the regional
superintendent.
superintendent at the time, and asked basically, what do I need to do with this? Do I need to send it to JSO? Do I need to send it to DCF, the Department of Children and Families? And then she named off some other people that she could think of sending it to, and the email records that we received show that he told her, "You have done what is needed," and I can't find any other records of that having gone anywhere. And Mr. Schneider declined an interview, citing legal concerns.
But you did request all of his email. There was no indication that he forwarded that he sent it to anybody, or and there's no record of that list showing up anywhere else in school records that you requested. So it's not like it was distributed as far as you can tell.
Correct. I really spent, honestly, a legitimate couple of months trying to track down anything and any possibility of where this might have gone, and I see nothing.
If you're just joining us, we're talking to Megan Malakote. She is a reporter who has handled a year-long investigation into what happened at Douglas Anderson and why. If you'd like to join our conversation, you can give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. Of course, you can read the article, the first in this four-part series today on Jacksonville Today. We've got a call from Shyla Jenkins. Good morning, Shyla. Go ahead.
Good morning. I just want to say thank you again to Megan, and the article I read is phenomenal, and it's a tribute to her work and how many of us she met with to bring this story to life. And what I would say about this series, it definitely, as readers, look through this, and your listeners are listening to this today, is to ask themselves, really implore, the people, the bad actors were taken out of the classroom eventually, but that the accountability to the administrators who were there who knew, to the district officials that we've already mentioned in some of the conversation this morning, have yet to be held accountable. There's really this question from alumni and from parents and from teachers who did the right thing. And Megan's article is really, I think, shine a light on that, and how they, did everything they needed to do to get this right. And it was for decades kind of left in the dark. So I would just implore your listeners to keep asking that question as it comes to light to how this happens at a school.
Thanks, Shyla. And we should note that Shyla herself is a former student. She is quoted in some of your reporting, Megan.
She's become a wonderful advocate for change at the school and for the students at Douglas Anderson.
Right. I mean, she emerged as kind of one of those voices at school board meetings, really raising the alarm and, calling for change there. To her point, in terms of people who did what they should do, something else happened in the year 2020, and that was Becky Lohr. She was a former teacher. She didn't teach at Douglas Anderson in 2020, but she, in that same time frame, decided that she really wanted to try to once again raise the alarm about Jeffrey Clayton, something that she had tried many, many times before to do.
That's right. It was actually her third official big push to get something done, although she has probably, it's impossible to count how many prior to that. But I could talk about Becky Lohr all day, because she is one of those people that when you think about what a teacher should be, that's Becky Lohr. And so when I spoke with other sources who had her as a teacher, their faces still break into these big grins, and they say, "Oh, I love Mrs. Lohr." Dr. Lohr now, she's gone on and got a doctorate. But she was a vocal teacher with Clayton in the department there. And so she had kind of a very front row seat to some of this things. And she describes seeing him touch students inappropriately, push his body into theirs, or Clayton was pretty widely known for putting his hand on female students' chests in a way that he shouldn't have, under the guise of breathing exercises or breathing instruction. And so she remembers seeing that and intervening and talking with students and reporting him to um, several different administrators, and even at the school level and at the district level, and still nothing happened. And so she documented it with district level officials through a letter that she wrote I hope I don't get my dates wrong off the top of my head, but I believe it was 2011, 2012
Hmm.
that she first submitted that. And there's no record in the district's records of them having kept it and received it. Although I did find records and was able to review some text messages saying that the principal at the time, Jackie Cornelius, had reviewed the letter. So I see hints of it, but I don't see the letter itself sitting in the files. And she did it again a couple of years later. They came back. Clayton had been under investigation for something else, although for that particular incident, the what else is not clear because it's not listed in what the allegations were. So she submitted the letter again then. And then in 2020, when all this conversation arises, by then she's moved on. She no longer teaches at Douglas Anderson. She's been gone for, I guess, about 8 years at that point. And so she had a friend say, "Hey, this is a time you could, say something." And she's like, "What could I say? I've been saying this." And
Kind of like, what more can
yeah,
I
what more
do?
can I do? Basically, and she sent it again, and this time she sent it as a like an email attachment directly to Diana Green, who was by then the superintendent. And we can see in the email records that Dr. Green received the letter, immediately sent it out to staff members to investigate. But it's not clear what happened from there regarding that specific letter. So,
Yeah, and so even in that one instance, I mean, you find that Becky is one of at least 5 teachers who reported
mhm,
Clayton, which is
mhm.
these are his colleagues witnessing things themselves, hearing concerns from students. Um, and even as she is documenting, in 2011 or, again in 2020, when she's putting things in writing and sending them to the appropriate people, your records requests show that they're not getting anywhere. They're not moving to anybody who's doing or at least there's no clear investigative results.
Right, and potentially, to add insult to injury, not only did their reports not go anywhere, they also then faced a lot of retaliation from Clayton. And so I heard this from Becky Lore, and I heard it from just uh, every other faculty, every other like colleague of his that I spoke with, that after they would intervene or say something or push back on some behavior of his, then they were met with this kind of retaliative behavior from Clayton. So in Becky Lore's case, it was a like hostile work environment that he became very difficult to work with, and in a number of ways. And that story repeats itself again for other colleagues that he worked with, and it's uh,
I mean, students too
students too. That's right. That's
said
right.
that, if they expressed any concern or pushed back at all in his conduct, and students, as we know, in an arts program, we'll probably talk about this a little bit more, but, they're dependent on that instructor for whether they're getting a assignments or a lead, a solo or a role in a play or whatever it is. They're dependent on those teachers to kind of
Absolutely, and I think that's what makes Douglas Anderson a uniquely complicated situation. And we get into this in some of the later parts of the series, but at Douglas Anderson, that's exactly correct. That these are in many cases students who hope to have careers in the creative industries, and you need people to open doors for you, right? And so the students see their teachers as those people that can open doors. In many cases, the teachers themselves had once worked in those industries, or at least they had connections because of their time instructing. And so students were very reluctant to want to do anything that could have hindered them from getting those introductions to what they saw as the tickets to the rest of their careers.
we've got a call from Eric on the South Side. Good morning, Eric. Go ahead.
Good morning, Ann, and thanks to you for all your good work. It's very important.
Thank you.
I was a substitute teacher in the early 2000s and a book vendor to Douglas Anderson and spent some numerous hours there, and I didn't catch the name of the longtime principal that you mentioned.
Jackie Cornelius was there for 20 years.
Yes, well, I was shocked. I would be at break time between classes, and Principal Cornelius is there, and I would see prolonged, extended hugging and cheek kissing among students right in front of her. And I thought, what is this all about? And are you aware that there was a serious sexual incident in the early 2000s in one of the bathrooms over there at Douglas Anderson. You recall that?
We've come across a lot of things that have come up, and we haven't reported all of these things because, of course, um, there's other there's legal ramifications to talking about different incidents. But we certainly have come across way more stories than what we've included in the stories.
Sure. And we should say, we mentioned earlier this list that was sent to the district in 2020, and also because it makes allegations that are not proven or perhaps were never even officially alleged. You're not naming those people other than to say they're all gone.
Right. Right. That's the
And most of them left under either a cloud of suspicion or perhaps were removed.
That's right. That's right. So I think what the student was hoping when he wrote the letter was simply that um, the district would investigate, to see if there was a problem there that needed to be remedied. And so that didn't happen. But over the course, some of them had already left, and some of them left since the letter, um, and a majority of them under clouds of suspicion. Yes.
You did, in the course of looking at, all of these cases, you identify a number of teachers that previously have not been publicly reported. So this cohort, some of whom were on the list, but you basically found altogether between the current ones that were removed sort of post Jeffrey Clayton and the ones that preceded him for the previous 20 years prior to that, you found about 13 altogether.
At least 13 is what I would say, because there was this, we've talked at the beginning about how unofficial discipline seemed to be a system that they would go to. And so you can't always tell when a faculty member leaves if they left because of these reasons or because of other reasons. And so there are at least a total of 13 and quite possibly more.
Yeah. We've got a call from Mark in Jacksonville. Good morning, Mark. Go ahead.
Couple of quick questions. All you ever hear about in Jacksonville, Duval County, is Douglas Anderson. And, we got, 30, 40, 50 high schools in the county. Have they been having similar sort of problems? Are we just not hearing about it or not? And also I'd like to know, there's all kinds of these famed kind of high schools, for the performing arts scattered throughout the country. Do they seem to have elevated risks of this kind of sexual behavior amongst teachers and students, or are we just an outlier?
Mark, I love that you asked that question because, of course, Megan, being the intrepid reporter that she is, asked and tried to find answers to those very same questions. So let's start with his first question, is kind of in the universe of Duval County schools. Is Douglas Anderson an outlier? You did try to get at that.
That's right. And so one of the reasons I think why we always hear about Douglas Anderson in Duval County is because Douglas Anderson is a fantastic school by many, many metrics. So if you look at Douglas Anderson's academics, it's one of the leading high schools in the district, arts or not. I mean, it's just academically, it's right up there with some of the schools that you would assume should be up there, like Stanton or something like that. 100% of its students graduated this year and many years prior. Its students go on to earn millions of dollars in scholarships. I mean, it's a fantastic academic school. So that I think is one of the reasons, because it is one of the district's flagship schools. Of course, there's also other reasons why we commonly hear about Douglas Anderson in recent years that are less suited for the marketing brochure, perhaps. But in that regard, no, Douglas Anderson doesn't seem to really stand out from the pack from what I have been able to determine. But there is a lot of missing data. So I would say no with an asterisk because it's unclear, because the data is not a complete data set. So I was able to receive from the district several different documents that helped me to piece together a list of all of the district-wide investigations for misconduct of all kinds. It's not just sexual misconduct. I mean, there's lots of reasons why you might open an investigation on an employee. But that it's not a complete data set because recent reports have the district investigating something like about 400 cases a year, and the numbers that I've been able to gather just aren't up to that point, and we haven't gotten clarification from the district yet. But the other thing that makes Douglas Anderson stand out from the crowd in this and be a little bit different is that what we just spoke about, where students are very keen on getting these recommendations from faculty members, and so they handle the situations a little bit differently, perhaps. The school is also a lot of people would point to the need for the school's reputation to stay intact. And so you see some cases where other schools maybe had one of these cases come up, took care of it, it's gone, you don't really hear about it. Because the act of the sexual misconduct in the school isn't in and of itself huge news to me as a reporter, because unfortunately it does happen. It shouldn't, and my heart breaks for the students who are victims of that kind of conduct. Absolutely should not happen, but it does, just statistically, right? What makes it news is the district not handling it properly, or the school not handling it properly. And that's what we've tried to focus on in the story, is that the fact that it happened, well, statistically, you're going to expect it to happen at every school, unfortunately. But you need to take care of it properly so that it doesn't become a place where it can happen again and again and again. And to answer your question, Mark, about does it happen at other art schools? Yes, actually it does. In fact, there's a school in Baltimore that served as kind of a model school for Douglas Anderson back in the 80s when it was first converted to an arts magnet school. And it, around the same time period in that summer of 2020 or shortly thereafter, also went through this kind of big social media spurned uprising, where then their district also had to take a fair number of corrective measures and policy changes and so forth.
We should say, you compiled this, master spreadsheet trying to assess things like how many complaints were levied against teachers at Douglas Anderson, how they compared to other schools. And so in the course of doing all that, I mean, you were finding major discrepancies. For instance, Clayton only is listed twice on this master list, even though he was investigated 8 times, officially investigated 8 times, right? And those are not the Post-it notes. Those are the ones that are actually documented properly. But all of this is happening in a district where we know, first of all, there was almost criminal charges that came from a grand jury report that found the district deliberately underreported criminal activity or crimes on campus at schools, and subsequently was cited, by the state or sanctioned by the state for failing to send timely these discipline reports. And so there is a long history in this district of failing to properly account for and properly report acts of violence, acts of criminal activity.
That's right. So there are several different ways that a crime on campus would end up being reported through the procedures that exist right now. One of the methods is what's commonly referred to as SESR reports. There's some longer acronym, but it's SESR reports, and that goes to the state mostly as just a tally. That doesn't typically go with identifiable information, and it doesn't lead to another like police investigation or anything, but it should show up in a tally of like a categorical tally of crimes on campuses or on school properties. And so if you'll remember, after the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting in 2018, the state took a couple of different steps to investigate that as well as to how that was able to happen. And the SESR reporting statewide was one of the things that was looked into with a microscope at that point. And Duval was found to be incorrectly filing SESR reports for sure. And in 2019, the district freely admitted to the state itself that it had found that it had not reported, I think it was about 2,000 cases at the time, that it should have reported. And at that time, it changed its policies. And then when the Douglas Anderson, when Clayton's arrest happened, then that also shone a light on the way that the district sends misconduct reports, which is a different type of reporting to the state. And that's the type of report that would then have identifiable information and might eventually, if the employee is a teacher, might lead to their license being revoked. So after Clayton was arrested, they were found to have not sent, it was a lot of reports. It ended up being about 70 some odd reports that they should have sent, and they didn't. So yes, it's a long history, but I also in my research see movement in the right direction in the recent years.
They have changed the policies there specifically. Well, district-wide, they've changed the policies at Douglas Anderson in terms of, student conduct. They've limited the kind of interaction a teacher can have. And it's important, too. They've changed how teachers can communicate with students. And, that now has to go through official channels. One of the things that your reporting uncovered, which was just astounding, was a teacher who ultimately was removed and I believe later arrested for other acts, but had been sending messages to a student through the Grinder app, and in the middle of the night had previously been reported with a different student texting him in the middle of the night.
That's right. He's not been arrested,
Okay.
but there is a pre-suit notice that the district has received for litigation towards that case. Um, but yes, employees are now required to contact students only through the district's official channels, which my understanding of that right now is that it's the Microsoft product that they use through the district's online systems.
And now it's only high fives, handshakes, fist bumps. You're not allowed to hug or press against a student or touch their chests or anything like that.
That's right. And of course, there are exceptions in the case of special ed students, perhaps, or emergencies and things like that. But generally, the district has made it clear that the only acceptable type of contact is a high five, a handshake, or a fist bump.
One thing that, and just in the scope of your reporting, we should say, I mean, you obviously went through all of these documents. You created, your own spreadsheets to try to, consolidate some of this information, make it digestible. You also went back and read a memoir from one of not the founding principal, but Jane Condon, clearly a big name associated with the early days of that school, building up its reputation. But it was a curious anecdote that you found in her memoir, and maybe it speaks a little bit to just the culture of, running an art school and also trying to not perhaps get teachers flagged for trouble.
That's right. So the anecdote is a story that she told of something that happened very early on in Douglas Anderson's time as a magnet school and in her time there, which was that something happened where a teacher put I think at the time it was a VHS tape into a VCR in the classroom to show what he thought was going to be a lesson on like painting, but it turned out to feature 5 naked students instead. And so in digging into how this happened, Principal Condon found that it was like a prank that the students had played, right? And so the teacher who had been supervising them, or was supposed to be supervising them, hadn't noticed that this had happened. And
it happened on campus.
It happened on campus, that's right. And so Condon describes thinking of it as a mistake and not feeling like the teacher or herself should lose their jobs over it, but feeling like that was a risk, right? And so she went to the district level HR and asked for help in how to keep this incident off the books. And she describes in her memoir this like discussion that she had with the HR about what she could do to keep it off the books. And so she decided that she would fill out one of the standard forms that I guess she was thinking should have been reported or should have been used to report the incident. But instead of turning it in, kept it in her files. She showed it to the teacher. She kept it to the files. And so the HR person, in her book, she records the HR person as having told her, we'll make sure that there's only one copy of it, because if it gets out, we're going to have to take action. We'll have to actually process it. But
the idea was, if no parent complains, it'll just sit in my desk. But if we do get a complaint, I'll have this report. We'll put it on file.
That's right. That's right. And so she talks about how no parent did complain, and by the end of the year she said, done, okay, we'll throw it away. Situation contained was her word.
Situation contained, yeah. So I mean, obviously that is an anecdote that she chose to share, presumably not considering that problematic. But I wonder if, just in the grand scheme of things, now that you've done all the reporting, if that in any way speaks to you, just in terms of whether it was the informal discipline that you discovered, or perhaps just a culture of accommodation.
Yeah, it's the informal discipline that stood out to me, because it really, it makes me think of the stories of informal discipline that we've heard in years later. And Douglas Anderson is the kind of school where the principals have led one into another, and it's this very connected culture that they've all worked together. So it's, until the current principal, had all just one kind of led to another. So you can see how a culture might be maintained throughout the decades.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it is one story in a magnificent 4-part series. It starts today. You can subscribe to JacksonvilleToday.org, and then you'll be able to see the rest of the series as well. Megan, thanks for your work on this. Thanks so much for coming on today to talk about it.
Sure. Thanks, Ann.